the I didn't have a chance to send out a draft agenda in advance, but I did put about a half an hour at the end of the meeting for new business. But if anybody has any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda they'd like to make, speak now.
I don't know, maybe, is there, would there be an update on the Franklin County Airport project? Or
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
was that
On the agenda.
It was?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
At 9:10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. 5 more minutes, Brian.
Easy, comes to one meeting in person and.
Well, I just had it under the secretary's update.
Oh,
so, yeah. Okay, approval from 23rd January.
so. Second.
Any comments, changes, edits, discussion?
To make one edit to it last
Okay.
night, but I did it in the text.
Okay,
It was just my, I was called an expert, not, and everyone else was representative or something.
okay.
Minor. Which. It's like the title of Silk culture representative or whatever.
All right, great. Thank you. All in favor with the friendly amendment from Ally, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Great to see so many people in person. It's an awesome day outside, so I appreciate you being inside in a meeting. And Secretary Moore, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Hopefully you're able to hear me in the.
Put it up, is that right?
Oh, got it.
Hang on a second, Julie.
I think that was this.
Another remote on the table.
No, I'm not.
We can hear you.
Remote
Yeah.
over there on the. I think one of those might have a volume.
We can hear you. You're a little soft. We'll try to.
All the way.
Yeah.
As far.
Does this one make it better?
There we go.
Right. Apparently it's binary.
Yeah. That is the sound of
Sorry about that. No, that's Teams does not like to auto select the right microphone when I'm doing anything apparently. So sorry about that.
Okay.
Hopefully I didn't blow
Perfect.
you all away. Good morning. I apologize that I'm unable to join you in person. I'm actually up in Burlington for a meeting of the Lake Champlain Basin program that starts at 10, but glad to get a few minutes with you this morning. There is some fairly significant construction taking place in the Hilton here, so just let me know if it overwhelms your ability to hear me. Thought I could provide just a couple of legislative updates that I think may be of interest to the committee in the waning days of the legislature. Certainly can offer an update on the Franklin County Airport, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So starting with the legislative pieces, there are two bills that I see as particularly germane to the work of the Endangered Species Committee that are continuing to see really intense effort and interest this week. The first of which is S213, which is, I think, been renamed now the Flood Safety Act. But included in that bill is language around, in particular, river corridors and riparian areas that I think probably holds interest for the committee in large part because it's such an essential component of Vermont conservation design. We have been actively participating in these conversations throughout. That portion of the bill would have the agency stand up a new regulatory program for any development that takes place in a mapped river corridor. Statewide, that's about over 200,000 acres of land based on our best estimates and involves about 45,000 parcels. So this would be a really significant undertaking. And I think we've moved kind of the technical substance of that work to a pretty good place in the ongoing dialogue with the legislature. My remaining concerns are around timeline and resources, and those things obviously go hand in hand. This is going to be a really significant change in public policy, and we need time to be able to do the education and outreach necessary, as well as the time needed to develop these regulatory programs. And obviously, this is a year of significant budget constraints as compared to at least the preceding 3 years where we were the beneficiaries of really large federal resources, and the legislature is continuing to work through that. We've testified when it comes to this riparian or river corridor permitting program, we would either need 4 staff in 6 years or 6 staff in 4 years to do the work. It's unclear if the legislature believes that they have the financial capacity to provide us even with 4 staff. So this is a piece we're continuing to weigh in on. But I think it's important to know that we are generally supportive of kind of the technical substance, but it's really at this point a matter of ensuring adequate resources, whether they be time or staff, are provided for us to do the work well and in a way that helps bring Vermonters along with us. The other bill I wanted to flag that's being actively worked, perhaps even as we speak, is H687, which is this year's version of the Act 250 modernization bill. It also includes a lot of work around reforming some of our downtown designated downtown center programs, planning efforts by regional planning commissions, but also would create a tiered system of jurisdiction for Act 250. And I think that tiered system probably holds the greatest interest for this committee. Tier 1, which is broken actually into Tier 1A and 1B, would be areas that are largely exempt from Act 250 regulation and is focused on designated downtowns and village centers. Tier 2 is effectively the status quo under Act 250, where there are certain jurisdictional triggers, including the number of units of development that would bring a particular project under Act 250. And then Tier 3 would be new work. It's work that the agency and the Natural Resources Board would work together to develop rules to support, but it would identify critical resource areas. And these would be other areas of the landscape where there would be automatic Act 250 jurisdiction that would apply. The initial concept for this by the legislature was pretty expansive. We've been pushing all along for this to be a separate set of conversations that take place outside the legislature. They had tried definitions about involving lands with slopes of more than 10 or 15%, headwaters areas, Class A waters. They looked at a range of different kind of available data sets, but all of them ended up, frankly, pulling in 70 to 90% of the landscape. And I think collectively agree that's not the intent, that this would ideally identify an additional 10 or so % of the landscape that needs that merits that higher level of protection. So we'll see where the bill lands. The version that was passed out of the House a couple of weeks ago did make those changes where it gave the agency and the Natural Resources Board the ability to come back with a proposal for what belongs in Tier 3. The Senate is wavering on that and had language in a version of the bill that was discussed yesterday that again would offer an explicit definition of Tier 3 that we find problematic. So this is a piece that's going to continue to get worked over the next week or so here. And we are expecting that bill would be voted out of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, potentially as soon as the end of this week, knowing that they're winding down their work on policy bills. In terms of the agency's budget, which is the other piece that continues to be in a bit of flux in front of the legislature, There aren't a whole lot of changes to what the governor had recommended for our budget that I believe I shared with you at our last meeting. Mostly around some of the one-time initiatives we'd proposed. Specifically, we had sought $4 million for our Healthy Homes program, which is a program that helps low-income Vermonters replace failed wells and septic systems. The funding for that has been halved. Some of the match money we need for the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that's available to the agency has also been reduced. So we are actively tracking those accounts. But in terms of our base budget, there are few, if any, changes from what the governor had recommended. And just in the budget space, before flipping over to Franklin County Airport, I would offer that we did submit on April 1st a $100 million application to EPA for climate pollution reduction grant funding. This is under the Inflation Reduction Act. The funding is largely focused on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but we do have a tranche of about $10 million within our application that is identified to be used for land conservation projects. Those land conservation projects would need to involve a change in land use in order to be able to show that we are taking steps to sequester carbon or further reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But it's a pretty exciting opportunity should it come to pass to bring new resources to bear in the land conservation space. And we expect to hear from EPA by early July as to whether or not we will receive a full, hopefully, award of the $100 million we applied for, or a partial award of our application, or no award, but I'm choosing to believe that's not actually a likely possibility at this point. So I can pause there maybe and see if folks have questions about any of the legislative and budget activity, and then otherwise happy to jump over and talk about Franklin County Airport.
Questions for the secretary? Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. Excuse me, I had a question about something you spoke to us about at our last meeting. It was, I think it was H12, and then I forget the exact name, but it was the endangered species related bill. Has that gone anywhere, or it seemed like it was? Yeah, just curious for an update there.
Yeah, I would actually ask maybe John Austin or Roz, who've both been working with members of the House Environment and Energy Committee on that bill. I think we've made some substantial progress in working with members to understand their concerns, to help them understand the existing role of the Endangered Species Committee. But I don't believe anyone's anticipating at this point that that bill would move forward this year. I don't know, John or Roz, if there's anything you'd add there.
I think you're right, Secretary Moore. The conversation that we had, and I think we shared this with the committee last time that you met. So we have a shared interest with the House Energy and Environment Committee on taking a look at the endangered species law to see to what extent we could make some improvements, but we were really unable to support Bill 812 for a number of reasons, not the least of which is one of the requirements in the bill was that we designate critical habitats for every listed species, and that's both unrealistic and unnecessary. So we testified to that committee that we support the spirit of their interest in taking a look at the law and seeing how we can improve our abilities to protect sensitive species. But we asked them to table Bill 812, and it appears that they've agreed to do that. There was a provision in their bill that we thought we could support moving forward with now, and that was the restrictions on interstate commerce and travel or transport of listed species. So we had three bills in front of them, 587, 588, and 597. Those all dealt with rare or listed species. 597, for instance, was giving the department authority to regulate the collection and possession of reptiles and amphibians. The other bill, 588, gave the secretary the authority to maintain confidentiality over the location of listed species. And 587 dealt with penalties and enforcement around listed species. increasing the penalties for that. They didn't take any of those up, despite our suggestion that they take the one provision out of H812, combine it with our three bills, which we did for them. We actually put a new package together for them and said, if you want to move this forward, we can support that. And it just never got their attention again. I think they by all of their time. So my impression is that they won't do anything with it this year, and maybe they'll start it up again next year. And while I have the floor, I'll just note to Secretary Moore's comments about the Act 250 reform bill. Secretary Moore has been a great advocate for our department's role and interest in the Act 250 process. So I think all of you are probably aware and familiar with the fact that our department has provided technical support to the Act 250 process for 35 to 40 years. It's been a long-term commitment, and we've never received one penny of support from anywhere other than our own regular source of funding, whether it's the non-game fund or it's Pittman-Robertson funds or it's licensed dollars or it's general fund dollars. It's always come out of our own budget. So if this reform bill were to move forward, it brings with it added responsibility for our department and the agency. And Secretary Moore has been a great advocate for trying to get additional staff capacity resources for us. Asking for, I believe, Secretary Moore, two positions in the bill right now. There's one position for our department. We've been asking for two.
It would ultimately be 2.5. We've indicated we would need 2 positions in Fish and Wildlife and 1 in Billy Custer's planning and policy shop, sort of out of the gate to support the work around Tier 3 and some additional mapping requirements and other rulemaking obligations that are contained in the bill. And then a 4th position that would be split between Fish and Wildlife and policy and planning in the out years once we actually get to implementing this to support what we believe would be an increased regulatory load by virtue of the fact that there are more projects subject to Act 250 jurisdiction.
John, I'm kind of curious. I mean, it feels like this is not something we've done before, but I'm wondering, like maybe in our September meeting, would it make sense to invite the chair of that committee to come talk to the ESC and, I mean, just talk about what we do and some of the components of the statute?
Yield to the
Both of them.
leadership here.
I think both of them.
I think that's a great idea.
I think there's a lack of understanding with any real depth with the 2 chairs. And we, for instance, Secretary Moore and myself and a number of folks took them on a tour last year just to look at habitat restoration. But I think any additional information that they can have to fill in some gaps and voids would be really helpful, Alan.
Okay, all right, we can make that a action item for us. You're frantically typing.
It's not recorded. No.
I don't know also whether a visit by the chair of the committee as well to the State House would be an option.
Yeah, I did testify
Yeah.
or, provided
Okay,
comments there. And it was, I think kind of in the early stages when we were really trying to iron out what was possible and what was, really seemingly a
Okay.
pipe dream. So, yeah.
Idea.
Okay. Should I jump over to the Franklin County Airport?
Go for it.
All right. So just to maybe level set with folks and make sure we're all on the same page. Franklin County Airport's about 350 acres of property up in Highgate and has been an airport for more than 50 years at this point. It also has one of the only and probably the most significant known breeding population of grasshopper sparrows. And VTrans is in the process of doing a couple of different projects up there. Last summer, they widened the runway. The runway is about 3,000 feet long, and they widened it by 75 feet. And then this summer, they are looking at a planned extension of the runway of about 1,000 feet. And so we have been working with them to reach agreement on a memorandum of understanding. that deals with necessary mitigation and also revegetation and vegetation management at the airport to support grasshopper sparrows. This is a bit of a delicate balance in that they also have clear obligations to the Federal Aviation Administration, who does not want to see us enhancing habitat that encourages more birds or larger birds potentially to take up residence at the airport. And so there's been a lot of back and forth, but I think we are very close to having an MOU to execute. Critical to this was VTrans has acquired what we've been referring to as the handy parcel. It's a roughly 120 acre L-shaped parcel that bounds the airport to the south and to the west. The area to the south is very important in terms of its potential and current support for grassland birds. And VTrans has committed more than 20 acres of that parcel as mitigation for impacts that are occurring as a result of the airport construction project. My hope is we will be in a position to sign the MOU potentially as soon as the end of next week. And it contains work around identifying those mitigation areas, but also then revegetation practices to encourage the types of forbs and I'm going to not remember the other word, Roz, besides forbs for the types of grass that we're looking to promote there. In addition, VTrans is agreed to pay a $40,000 mitigation fee. And this accounts for the loss of some additional grasshopper sparrow habitat associated with a future taxiway that would be built to the north and east of the existing runway. Part of what VTrans' interest has been in this MOU is trying to have kind of a global solution for concerns around grassland birds at the airport that they can then work to implement through the context of their operations. So we did have a briefing for Alan and Mark a couple of weeks ago with a status update, and look forward to being able to share the final version of the MOU out as soon as it's available.
Know if it's worth, I mean, I think I just have a screen capture of the map, but I guess the big,
I could share screen.
yeah, if you've got that map, probably a better copy of that map than I do. I mean, the big change in particular with the handy parcel at the south end of the airport is that the new mitigation area does actually meet the 2-to-1 acreage requirement. So, I mean, sort of like right on the nose, or maybe about a couple acres, not quite, but about 37 acres impacted and 72 acres planned for mitigation work. So it seems like in a lot of ways this is making the best of a bad situation, but at least in terms of the spirit of meeting those mitigation acreages, we're kind of right there. The challenge in some ways is what the success is going to be, and particularly around the timing, because we've already lost acreage and we're about to lose more, and we haven't done any mitigation sort of at this point. Yeah, maybe blow it up a little bit, Roz, and you can just scroll up to the top. And so
You think I can?
So the little table at the top are the acres that are lost. So 37.46 acres lost. The 2-for-1 would be 74.92. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, yeah, you can keep it zoomed in, 72.52 if you count up all the areas kind of around the south end, which is where the big chunk is, area E, And then, the other area is kind of around the fringe of the airport.
E is the handy parcel.
E is the handy parcel, right? Yeah.
There's a little chunk to the on the left top side up here. Well, I have a cursor. Right in here, that sort of was added on in the V-Trans map. It's really an area they were clearing that they have to clear as part of the project, but it will become as well. So, but the handy property we were looking at was really this big area down here.
That's the blue.
Yeah, the rest of the blue.
That hasn't been purchased
It has.
and is under management already or is not?
No, it was a hayfield. It wasn't habitat, so it would have to be restored.
So what guarantees are there, or legal language that, looking at the map here, it looks like if there was gonna be an expansion, that's probably where, the length of the runway would get increased or whatever. Is there a guarantee that property is gonna be maintained in perpetuity as
Yeah,
grasshopper sparrow habitat, or?
that's what the MOU codifies, is the agreement between ANR and V-Trans to maintain areas indicated in blue as grassland bird habitat.
As well as these other areas that weren't impacted, and the yellow areas here, which will also be restored, that were disturbed last year.
Now, is that in conflict with what the Federal Aviation Agency would like to see in terms of, the ability of an airport to be expandable, or how does that all work in their eyes?
I think the biggest challenges from FAA's perspective are twofold. One is the V-Trans has some obligations around mowing, particularly in the immediate area of the runway and along the fence line, because they're required to ensure the fence integrity is maintained. That obviously can be challenging with some of the seasonal mowing restrictions we need for grassland bird protections. And then the other piece is just I think it's some ways a word choice, but it is very clear FAA's hackles get raised when we talk about enhancing wildlife habitat at an airport. And so we just have to be thoughtful about how we're describing the work we're looking to pursue at the airport. I think V-Trans recognizes that grassland birds are not a particular threat to aviation. And so their concerns aren't necessarily specific to grasshopper sparrows, but rather larger precedent that may get established about wildlife at airports.
There's a lot to be left to be, explored with that, because there are examples where we're managing in these sandy soils on airports is actually less expensive to airports in the long run, and is not doesn't appear to be a strike hazard, to present strike hazard. So I think FAA is basing their position on what's happening at different airports with different soil conditions in different parts of the country, and they apply it, as a blanket nationally. And so I think there's some ways that they like to see things happen on airports, and they just apply it, and there's a lack of understanding of, they can't deal with the fine grain of a specific situation, right? So it would be great to be able to do something with that, but just to come together on a better understanding.
But the MOU is sort of broader. It covers grassland species management at other airports as well. Did I hear that right?
No, it's just
It
for
doesn't.
Franklin County.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, is that something that might be warranted though? Like, sort of just to put them on notice that they've got other properties, there's other airports where grassland species. We need to be cognizant of grassland species at other airports.
Yeah, I suspect they're keenly aware at this point. And, this has been, Mark Labaro told me we've been working with airports for a long time on grasshopper sparrows in particular, but there aren't any left at the other airports.
Yeah.
There aren't any more grasshopper sparrows.
Right.
So.
And are upland
Sometimes there's
sandpipers more of a, like, not that they're on the radar here, maybe. Would upland sandpipers be more of a concern to FAA in terms of bird strikes, like bigger birds?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so too. And I don't, it would be interesting to know a little bit more about what they do like at Pease, because they are like right there on the runway.
Yeah.
Well, so Pease and Westover and JVCC, they all have a.
Yeah.
They manage they manage for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
they
So,
do. Okay.
yeah.
What,
That's a good.
Roz, what is with respect to Brian's question, what is the last sort of plan in the permit that was issued? Wasn't it more about a larger scale airport management plan? Like the last component of the permit that we issued, doesn't that address issues of kind of broader airport?
I'd have to look at it again,
Okay.
but I don't remember that being, I remember it being specific to Franklin County and it didn't go beyond that.
Okay.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I
that
mean,
either.
I think we
No.
had offered them the opportunity to identify habitat and other locations where mitigation
Mhm.
could be built out. Springfield Airport in particular comes to mind in that I think there had been
Yep.
previous observances of grassland birds, and it was more when the handy parcel really came in at the 11th hour when VTrans was making their application to FAA. And if those 20 or 30 acres hadn't been available, we would have needed to look at mitigation opportunities elsewhere. And that's really how other airports, I think, factored into the conversation.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think everybody agreed that to the extent it was possible to do mitigation here at this site, which has, the most birds, that was really the preferred option.
Well, it was lowest risk because we could create habitat. Didn't know if they would come.
Yeah. Overall, though, look, we made the point that they would be chastened or contrite about this. Do they realize that the gravity of what happened up there? I think that's sort of a broader point that would be great to drive home with them.
I know Secretary Moore has had plenty of conversations with Secretary Flynn, so.
I have. I think it's important to recognize also, though, that endangered species are but one of the issues at the airport. And frankly, as A&R Secretary, I've also remained cognizant of the fact that part of the disturbed areas indicated in yellow was by virtue of the stormwater permit issued by another part of this same agency. And so appreciate the Endangered Species Committee concerns, but I've got other programmatic obligations that also are sort of at play here. This is we've got a complicated set of objectives we're trying to achieve between the grassland bird protection, stormwater management, and VTrans need to remain in compliance with FAA requirements as well.
We take it.
Where's the area that's being reseeded by the mix that we recommended? Could you just?
Well, all the disturbed areas will be reseeded with a mix that we worked out based on all kinds of factors. And so any of the yellow area, which is all to be restored. And then we'd use that same mix on any areas that we're restoring new, the new area like the handy property and all those blue areas to the west. Yep.
It would seem like the airports would be the ideal sort of situation for off-site mitigation or habitat banking, trying to pick a piece of habitat not near an airport that could be suitable and trying to manage that and just get right out of their hair. Has anybody really looked at Not saying that there are other populations of grasshopper sparrows, but at least appropriate habitat that's not right at the airport.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in, sort of big picture, I think that's an awesome idea and, something that we talk a fair amount about. I think in this particular case with, the largest population of grasshopper sparrows in the state, it's hard to think about offsite, and, kind of having a, crossing your fingers and hope the grasshopper sparrows will show up, somewhere else in Franklin County.
I guess I'm looking at the larger issue of working with airports.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And grassland species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know that, I mean, I was hired one time to do survey work for the Rutland Airport. Frankly, they didn't want to hear about anything that was living anywhere near
Yeah.
the runway.
Yeah. I mean, I think it become, if you took something like bobolink, which is more of a grassland generalist, I mean, I think you could have, sort of adjacent farmland you could manage easily and assume bobolinks are going to show up there. But if you've just got a regular old hayfield next to an airport, the probability that grasshopper sparrows are going to move over there and be successful is a lot riskier.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's something to think of just in terms of working with airports. Is offsite mitigation if there's an option for that and for the species that we are concerned about. And I see your point here with this particular population, but it doesn't seem like we do a lot of that kind of land banking, where you're looking at other sites and you say, okay, we're going to lose your bobolinks here, but make sure that we create some bobolink habitat elsewhere.
Under Act 250, over the last handful of years, I've noticed the ski area clients that my employer helps with Bignell's thrush habitat, that there's been kind of a change in mentality around that. And so rather than sort of project by project slicing off, trail widening or whatever, lift replacements, rather than project by project habitat impact and mitigation kind of reactively, that there's been a change of, all right, let's pick an area in the ski areas, land holdings or, that could be available and establish that kind of bank approach. It's interesting to think about.
Something we've dabbled in over the years. And we've accepted, in effect, a mitigation banking fee for some power line projects that were going to impact deer winter habitat, and it just wasn't possible and didn't make sense to try and do on-site mitigation or off-site mitigation for that matter. And so we figured out an arrangement based on regional real estate prices for an appropriate fee that we received, and then we put in an account, and it was earmarked, and we used it specifically for the conservation and enhancement of a similar type of habitat within the same general geography. We've done it with bear habitat in a number of instances, maybe the most significant being the Deerfield Wind Project, where as part of the settlement agreement, we ended up with $2 million, at least half of which was earmarked for more habitat conservation, which we've been working on over the years. When we came up with the original arrangement to accept basically a mitigation fee from solar energy developers for impacts to grassland habitat, that's been in play for a while now. And the money currently goes to the Bobolink Fund in Massachusetts, but the money is earmarked for projects in Vermont. It does not not a penny goes to projects in Massachusetts. All comes back to Vermont. We're rethinking that approach because we can see some benefits in working with all of you who have expertise in grassland birds to think about, we were to take that money and manage it ourselves rather than give it to the Bobolink Fund. It would perhaps give us a little more creative license to think about what can we do to, for the long term, better conservation for grassland birds. So that's a conversation we're embarking on now, and I suspect we'll be reaching out to the bird SAG and others for guidance on that. But just to say, the idea, I don't remember when we started on this arrangement with the bobolink fund. It's probably been going on 8 years now. But at the time, it was, and the issue still remains as one of capacity. So to take money like that and then manage it to put it to projects elsewhere, it's a lot of work. And so in order to do that, well, we decided 8 years ago or whenever it was, the bobolink fund exists to do this sort of work. Let's capitalize on that. So rather than putting the burden on ourselves to manage the money and find the projects and then provide oversight, let's use this partner organization to do it for us. And it's worked pretty well. But it doesn't necessarily get at issues like we're talking about with Franklin County Airport, where, you know, it's not all grasslands are created equal, I've come to learn. And it would be nice to be able to account for some of the unique interests of, say, grasshopper sparrows or eastern meadowlarks. So anyway, the point being, we're talking about a new concept with grassland bird mitigation and mitigation banking. But there's still a lot of details to be figured out. And there's also the capacity challenge. So, you know, if we do that, it means we won't do something else.
And there's been a lot of discussion in bird SAG about this already, so it's an ongoing conversation.
So has anyone ever had success? Al, you might know more about this, like actually, I don't know how to term what the term would be, but like transplanting populations of songbirds and like grassland birds, kind of like what happened with the peregrines, where we're able to captive breed and then reintroduce them to, you know, sites, and they have site fidelity, so they come back to those particular areas. So like what Jim was saying, creating, you know, some reserve somewhere that has the right habitat, and then figuring out a way to actually reintroduce the population and reestablish it in place. Does that happen ever? Or?
It's actually happening right now with the Florida grasshopper sparrow, which is a subspecies. They don't, they're reintroducing, I don't know, 50 of them, are you?
Yeah.
But it's a brand new concept, and they were, you know, that was at a point where there was nothing left of that subspecies. So it was dire, but also they don't know the cause of the decline. So they're reintroducing without knowing what the threat was and whether it's abated. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, sort of a, you know, pseudo grassland bird, loggerhead shrikes have been reintroduced on San Clemente Island, but it's all naval funding, which, I mean, it's just an amazing captive facility that they have to raise those birds and reintroduce them. So it's almost like unlimited funding for that.
Mark has
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to,
Hold on.
Just,
Yep.
I'm gonna have to drop off in 2 minutes. I'm happy to answer your question if it's from me, Mark, but also just wanna give folks a little heads up, fair warning that I'm gonna have to depart momentarily.
no, this is just a general observation that was made. Somebody, Ken Cover had looked on, or somebody looked on eBird, and there seems to be grasshopper sparrows in Quebec to the north of Franklin County. So there may be a, I don't necessarily want to call it a source population, but, you know, there may be birds already in place to fill that space as we do the work.
And we did look at whether there were any mitigation possibilities near the airport so that we could get the sweet spot of having habitat off airport, but nearby the existing population, but there just wasn't anything viable that we felt like would have a good chance.
It's really the soils that are the determining factor.
It's this, yeah, you need those sandy soils usually, or maybe you can do without those, but you need then grazing. And there were a lot of prime ag soils around, and anything that wasn't prime ag and was the Missisquoi sandy loam, which this is, I think I have that right, was a gravel pit. So we did look into that.
Well, thank you, Secretary Moore. I don't know if you have any final words, anything else you want to add?
I don't, but thank you for your time this morning, for your interest, and for your service to the Endangered Species Committee. I look forward to joining you in person at your next meeting.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, well, before I turn it over to Chris and John, I want to mention that we have a new chair of the Mammal SAG who is online joining us here. Jed Murdoch, faculty member at Rubenstein School, longtime member of the Mammal SAG, and welcome. We should probably introduce ourselves. I don't know if you know everybody in the room, but maybe it's worthwhile going around, although you can't see us very well. We can raise our hands and wave and tell our roles. So anyway, I can start. So although Jen and I know each other fairly well, Alan Strong, he and his pronouns, and chair of the Endangered Species Committee.
Thank you.
Hi, Jed. I'm Grace Glynn. I'm she/her department botanist with Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
Hi, Jed, it's Roz, Wildlife
Hey, Roz.
Diversity Program Manager. Thank you for stepping up as chair. Appreciate that.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chris Herrick. I'm the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife.
Pleased to meet you, Commissioner.
Hey, Jed, you know me, Ali Kasiba. I'm serving as the silvicultural representative.
Great, Ally. Nice to see you.
Hey, Jed, this is Jim Andrews. Good to see you
Hey, Jim.
again.
All right.
Reptile amphibian SAG.
Morning, Paul Wizarek. I'm an ESC member representing agriculture.
Great.
John Cart, biologist here at Fish and Wildlife.
Hi, John. Thanks.
Hi, Jed. Carla Fenner. I'm an ESC member representing Flora and a member of the Flora Scientific Advisory Group.
Great.
Rich Langdon, fish chair, fish SAG chair.
Hey, Jed. John Austin. Nice to see you. Hi, John.
Jed Brian Pfeiffer, I'm a member of the committee representing fauna, and I sit on the invertebrate SAG.
Hey, Jed, Matt Peters, ESC member and chair of the Flora SAG.
Go ahead,
Great.
Stephanie.
I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and representing actually Secretary Tebbets on the ESC committee. Thanks.
Go for it, Mark.
Hey, Jed, Mark LeBar, chair of the Bird SAG.
Great. Hi, Mark.
Yeah, Kent, go for it.
Hey, Jed, thanks for stepping up. I'm the chair of the Invert SAG. So if we can ever work together on anything, let us know in our SAG.
Great.
Ticks.
Ticks.
Savannah?
Hi, I'm Savannah Ferreira. I use she/her pronouns. I'm with the Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation, and I represent the chair for the fungal SAG.
And
Great.
so we've got a couple members who we've got Dorothy Allard is the chair of the newly created Bryophyte SAG, not here today. And then Becca Washburn represents Forest Parks and Recreation as a member of the committee as well. So that's sort of the full group that typically attends the meetings. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone.
Well, this is a real dream team. Let me just make a couple quick comments here. Thank you for those introductions. As Alan mentioned, I'm a faculty member in the Wildlife and Fisheries Biology program at UVM. I've been on the SAG, the Mammal SAG, for the last about 14 years, so it's not a first rodeo for me, but I did just recently step into the chair position.
I do just want to quickly acknowledge the contributions of Bill Kilpatrick that many of you have worked with for a long time. Bill recently did step down as chair, and he's just been an exceptional leader for our group. Excuse me. And I just, for the record, want to make note of his contributions to mammals and broader conservation in the state. Greatly appreciated. And Bill's still a member of the SAG, but has taken himself out of the leadership role. I do also want to thank the department for committing the time of two people in particular, Alyssa Bennett, who's our main point person for small mammals and bats, and most recently Bree Furphy, who brings expertise in martins and other carnivores, which I think is really helpful. So thank you for committing the time for those two. We do have a few new members that we hope to bring in over the course of the next year. So I'll probably be bringing some membership applications to you in the next meeting or two. But thank you for that introduction, and look forward to working with you all.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Jed. And yeah, it was great to recognize Bill last fall with the Sally Laughlin Award. So nice to really publicly acknowledge all the work that he's done for endangered and threatened species. So yeah, and yep, big shoes to fill. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan.
Alan, maybe I should mention right here, it's just appropriate that Bill also withdrew from the Reptile Amphibian SAG. He's been a member of the Reptile Amphibian SAG since it was initiated. And same thing, Bill has made a tremendous contribution to us, particularly in the area of genetics and staying with the science. So we're really sad to see him go.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. All right. Well, I will turn it over to Chris and John for updates from Fish and Wildlife.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Welcome, Jed. I'll start with a legislative update. There's another bill out there. In fact, John and I will be going down today on S-258, which is the bill that purports to reorganize the Fish and Wildlife Board. Among other things, is included in that is broadening rulemaking to include not just hunting and fishing and trapping, but also non-game management, which we're concerned about. It adds a whole nother level of bureaucracy. So we're going to testify today. The bill was initiated in part because there's this a belief or a statement that the department doesn't listen to people other than hunters and anglers, which is not true as evidenced by the people sitting around this table. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. And it probably will pass the House as it is right now. It was amended in the Senate. It requires a fair amount of training for new board members. It's going to require a tremendous amount of work from the department staff without additional resources. And there are a number of prerequisites stated in the bill to become a Fish and Wildlife Board member, even though the board now becomes advisory only. And they add two board members, one appointed by the speaker and one appointed by the Committee on Committees. It's unclear to us who gets to decide if somebody meets the minimum standards of these prerequisites. Is it the appointing authority, or can somebody challenge it in court? And so I don't like, when we look at laws, I don't like having vagueness because it just creates misunderstanding. The other part of the bill is that it bans hound hunting of coyotes. And what's important to note about that is that we just spent a year and a half developing rules for an unregulated activity, and we just finished the season January 1st to roughly mid-March. And the bill intended to reduce in the hunter landowner conflict, and we had zero conflict during that season. And so if you look at it from an objective standpoint, it met the desire of the statute and the rulemaking. So we're concerned that they're just now pulling the rug out from under it. But that's probably the least of our concerns when you look at this bill. It has more to do with the board. And the reason I mention it here specifically is it's unclear to us what the interplay between the new board, the rulemaking, and the ESC will be under this new scheme. And I wish I could tell you what it is. We're looking at it. We also don't want to spend a huge amount of the lawyer's time investigating that till we have a final version of this, because it is in flux. But it is, there is a big question hanging out there that we need to look at. We'll see what happens. The governor said as late as today on WVMT that he would veto the bill. And it'll be very close to see if there are votes to sustain the veto. So that's where we are with that. The other piece of legislation, it's not really legislation, it was included in our capital bill, and this is good news. Down in Windsor, adjacent to the Windsor Grasslands WMA, is land that's associated with the prison. And if you don't know, the prison is kind of like a disc. And then from the fence line, and this is true, to where they could see through a rifle scope remains prison land, for obvious reasons, I suppose. And the intent of the Corrections and Institutions Committee and their direction to us and BGS was to transfer that land from the back to the fence line to Fish and Wildlife to enlarge the WMA, which is the grasslands. And John can speak a little bit about that, the value of that particular WMA, but that's good news. There was only one person on the committee who dissented, so it's in the big bill now. And so we need to come back in January with a proposal with BGS on what that would look like. So I'm actually kind of happy about that. So that's any questions about either one of those? I think the light on your phone is on, by the way. That's not gonna help the battery life. Sorry. I know. Make sure the notes reflect that.
That's fun.
Observant guy.
Yeah.
Somebody's getting a big bucks.
Yeah.
That right now.
Oh, John. My dad jokes are rubbing off on John.
Yeah, I know, you've become a bad influence on me.
I know.
Depend on John to enlighten us, right?
Anyone else?
Right now is the land that's managed by the prison, like cut like lawn essentially? What's
No,
the-
I think
yeah.
they cut it once a year.
Okay, all right.
So it's actually almost being managed in our favor.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's a good move. And it was brought initially, I went down almost a year and a half ago and was pushing this. And it wasn't accepted well by another state agency, but now that it's legislation, they seem to like it. So that's good news. And I don't think it's going to be at any cost to the department.
Yeah, great.
Just to give you like a quick overview, and then I'll ask John to give an update if he wants. The Fish and Wildlife Board just approved the moose hunt plan for this fall. And it's again 180 permits for just up in E1 and E2, which is up in Essex County. Speaking of ticks, this is at the recommendation of our biologist in Fortin to reduce. And if you don't know, the general theory is by reducing the population density of the moose, we reduce the availability of hosts to the ticks, and hopefully over time reduce the number of winter ticks up there We generally want to get our moose population down to about 1 moose per square mile. I think up there right now, it's around 1.7. And that's something we would be doing regardless of the tick. It's just the right habitat for our moose population, and that's what we have in the rest of the state, which is why there's no hunting in those areas. The deer herd is healthy. I noticed that we published the age of the deer that were harvested last fall. It was a 19-year-old doe taken. Did you see that? That's an old deer.
Wow.
But we've already speculated that the deer population will be very high this year with the lack of really any kind of winter. And so we've also approved our deer management plan for the fall as well. That went out for public hearing, as they all do. And we have a number of petitions in right now, which we will be coming back in May with a response to. And trying to think what else. That's all I have. I'll answer any questions folks might have about the department in general.
On the moose population, it seems to have declined moose in central Vermont, mountains, Green Mountains as well, without the increased population. Why the decline? Have you seen that decline?
I know that the moose population is in the density range that we want it to be in every area except for E1 and E2. And I know we monitor the populations pretty well. Again, it's also an estimate based on the deer hunter
observations.
Yeah, it's a proxy because we're not out tagging them or anything like that. But it's pretty accurate. I think Katie Geeter has done some regression analysis on that, and it gets even better every year, our estimates. And so it's in the range that we like. What we're really looking for is not an overabundance, but a healthy herd. And that's what we're seeing.
I think the moose population outside of Essex County has sort of found its sweet spot in terms of the carrying capacity of the habitat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in part a function or a reflection of changes in forestry practices and forest products economies. In other words, there's less young forest available to provide them with a source of food. But one of the benefits to the density of moose in, along the spine of the Green Mountains, for instance, or in southern Vermont, winter ticks are not as much of an issue because the density is such that winter ticks aren't being transferred.
But you haven't seen a decline. That's what I'm hearing, is that you haven't seen any particular
Not a
decline.
decline. I will say it's stable.
Pretty stable.
Yeah, we're not concerned if that's what you're asking.
And you're fairly confident that it, like going from 1.7 moose per square mile to 1 would sort of have approximate effect on the tick?
Yeah, I think if you listen to Nick talk about that, and he can talk about it at length, and he has to actually when we go to these public hearings because it takes 3 times for people to understand the concept. But the answer is yes. But it's also we're not doing this alone. It's a regional approach. Maine and New Hampshire are also part of a larger project, and it's going to take time. Anything like this, we're not going to see it go boom. It's going to be a trend that probably 10 years out we'll know. But the theory makes sense when you look at the life cycle of the winter tick, which is different, as you know, and what we're seeing already. So yeah, the answer is we expect to have good results.
Cool.
And I'll just mention, break or lunch. Jed was co-advisor for the 2 Moose students who did their master's work with funding from Fish and Wildlife. So Jed is pretty up on the recommendations about moose hunting, moose density, and where that information came from, but maybe save that for later if anyone wants to ask more questions.
Yeah,
Jed.
I think those are all, conclusions that come out of that large study that lasted about 4 or 5 years. And I think Nick is making good use of those results, and it makes sense to me. So, but I think the trick is to see, over time, is it working? And so monitoring is key. And gosh, I wish we had a better way of estimating density. That would be great, but it's
No kidding.
it's hard to do. It's a technical challenge. So right now, yeah, we're sort of relying on those hunter records.
I will tell you just anecdotally, when I deer hunt, I see moose. I don't see deer.
Yeah.
Because I'm not allowed to shoot deer. I don't know if you know that the commissioner is not allowed to shoot deer during his term of service.
First commission.
Really?
No, it just seems to work out that way. But
You got an
Just-
extra bag.
I know. Just to give you a little, when we talk about these winter ticks, and it might be worth having Nick come in and do a presentation into this group, but we're, we all go out, we go, fly fishing or walking in the woods, and we check ourselves for ticks. And you find maybe 1 or 2, right? We're talking in the tens of thousands of ticks on a moose. And when each one of them takes their last blood meal in the spring, that is a huge, huge impact. And where we're seeing that impact is on the offspring and their birth weight and survivability and even number, whether they have 2 or just 1. So it is really stunning when you see pictures or actually see a moose with 25, 30,000 ticks on it. And as you probably do know, and Jed can certainly speak more intelligently than I can, moose don't groom themselves like deer. And so that's why they're also so susceptible.
But you never thought you'd learn so much about ticks.
Oh, I'll tell you what. All I thought I was gonna do is fish and hunt, but none of that happens.
I think Nick's out of a job here.
Yeah.
I listen well. I'm a good learner, but I'm not. Nick would be great. And so would having Jed. It might be worth hearing because there's still a lack of understanding about the what we're trying to do with the moose management. I have this conversation in the State House a lot. And I think some of it boils down to a lack of understanding of the difference in the type of tick. Because I had an actual legislator say to me, well, you wouldn't shoot your dog if it had a tick on it, which I thought was a poor comparison for a number of reasons. Yeah. So we have our work cut out for us. So anyway, other questions? And then certainly, John, if you want to add on.
Chronic wasting disease. Are we, I know we haven't found that in Vermont. But
No.
Are we like with a bigger deer herd? And then I think there might be a climate change. Are we like, what's our concern there? Are we monitoring? Like, what's?
We are. We're
Yeah.
very concerned about that. And that's one of the reasons we don't allow baiting of deer.
Yeah.
And not all states follow that model, by the way. But I think they have found CWD in New York. And so we're really concerned about it coming in. And I don't know, John, if you want to add to that.
Well, years ago, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we had a very active CWD surveillance program where we were collecting samples from deer on a regular basis, whether they were struck by a car or some mortality or other sources. And in particular, any deer that was acting suspiciously. And we would take brainstem samples and we would do lots of testing. We never had a CWD positive, and to date, we haven't had a CWD positive. We don't have that kind of rigorous monitoring anymore just because it's so costly. But when somebody does report a deer that's acting sick or suspicious, we try to collect a sample and have it tested. We actually are going through a rigorous structured decision-making process right now that they're gonna wrap it up. Our staff working with partners are gonna wrap it up at the end of May. And the purpose of that is to come up with a response plan. So, to the extent that it is discovered in Vermont, we want to have a plan in place for what we're going to do about it. But, you know, prevention is really our primary focus. And that's why we have restrictions on the importation of deer and deer parts from CWD positive states and provinces, which is frankly most everywhere else you go.
Is there any mandated like testing at deer farm facilities in the state? And so that see, my impression is that that's where the source often spreads from.
Question.
It seems like it would be a great targeted surveillance kind of approach for early
I
detection.
believe that that's a requirement, Commissioner.
I don't know off the top of my head, probably.
Well, it's regulated by the Agency of Agriculture.
Yeah, that's right.
You know the answer to that, Stephanie?
I don't. I'm not, I don't know about the importation of deer. That was the question, correct? Yeah.
If there was any testing at deer farm facilities for CWD.
Oh, at the facilities. I don't know, but I can find out and I can share with Alan the next meeting. I will ask Dr. Haas.
Great.
That's great.
I think the only other thing I would want to make sure you're aware of is you may have heard that in our proposed budget and the governor's recommend was the closure of Salisbury Fish Hatchery. The legislature will likely mandate that it stays open till the end of its discharge permit, which is the December of 27, but they funded it just for 1 more year. So that's likely to happen. And when I testified, I said I was concerned about the mandate to keep it open for 3 years with only 1 year's funding. That creates a lot of problems, not the least of which is staffing. If somebody leaves, I'm not sure we're going to be able to hire somebody to go in there with everything up in the air. But so it's very likely that will stay in the budget. And so Salisbury at least is alive for 1 more year. That would be my prediction.
And after that point, do you have a feel for if we could shut down
So that's a great,
permanently or just kind of mothball for the future?
it's a good question. So part of the legislation as it stands now is requiring us to do a study on what we would do. And what would it take to improve the facility to get a new discharge permit. So those are all questions that we've been looking at. If we did shut it down, we have to maintain the building because it's a historic building. So there will be a continued investment of some sort there for that. And then the question is, what do we do? How do we replace the brood stock? And it would require purchasing eggs in some instances, and who knows, we might have to eliminate stocking some species. That's all in here. We'll have to come up with those recommendations. That's all I got.
All right, well, I'd say, I don't know, want to take 5 and stretch for a sec. People need a bio break. Bathrooms, I think, are right outside. And then turn it over to you, John, and talk about permits.